All right, ready to dive into something kind of juicy. We're talking about love, that crazy, exhilarating, sometimes messy experience.
Who doesn't love a good love story?
Right. But we're going deeper than just a surface level look at romance. We're going to figure out what makes love last. You know that feeling falling head over heels, like you're living in your own personal rom-com?
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
We're dissecting that feeling today. What's the difference between a fleeting crush and that love that lasts a lifetime?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. So let's start with that heart skipping a beat, can't eat, can't sleep kind of love. Is there something to that feeling, or are we all just a little crazy?
Well, I wouldn't say crazy, but there's definitely a reason why that early stage of love feels so intense.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Spill the tea. What's the science behind all those butterflies?
You're not going to believe this. Psychologists actually have a term for it, that intoxicating phase, limerence.
Limerence. Okay, I've never heard that before.
It's not exactly a common term, but it perfectly captures that almost obsessive infatuation we feel when we're smitten with someone. Dorothy Tenov, a psychologist who spent years studying this, describes it as being completely swept away by romantic feelings for another person.
So it's not just me being dramatic. It's an actual scientifically backed phenomenon.
Exactly. And here's the thing about limerence. It's often confused with long-lasting love. We think those intense feelings are the real deal, the kind that's built to last.
So you're saying there's a catch?
There is a big one. Limerence has an expiration date.
An expiration date. Wait, are you saying love is like a carton of milk? Give me the details. This is big.
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but it's true. According to Tenov's research, limerence, on average, lasts for about 2 years.
2 years. Okay, mind officially blown.
It's like our brains are hardwired for this intense but temporary burst of romantic energy.
Wow, only 2 years. No wonder so many songs and stories are about heartbreak and those early days of a relationship.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. What happens after those 2 years? Well, that's where the real work of love begins.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. If limerence is fleeting, what comes next? If those feelings were going to inevitably fade, how do we make a relationship last for the long haul? So we're wired for this intense but short-lived limerence, this primal urge. But why? Why wouldn't our brains want us to feel that way about someone forever?
Well, think about it this way. Limerence is nature's way of, hitting the fast forward button on our mating instincts.
Ah, so it's all about survival of the species, making sure we're driven to, procreate.
Exactly. Limerence lowers our defenses and makes us more likely to take risks, to really put ourselves out there. It's like, for a little while, we're living in this heightened state where logic takes a back seat.
That explains a lot about, well, just about everything. But seriously, it's kind of wild when you think about it that way. We're all just pawns in the game of evolution, driven by these subconscious urges.
In a way, yes. And it makes those "what was I thinking" moments make a lot more sense, right? Like those grand romantic gestures that seem like such a good idea at the time, but maybe in hindsight weren't the most thought out.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm pretty sure we all have a few of those stories tucked away in our past.
Yeah.
But it all comes back to this idea that limerence isn't really about lasting love. It's about, as you said, keeping the human race going.
Right. It's about that initial spark, that magnetic pull. But then reality sets in, the limerence starts to fade, and we're left with, well, real life.
Exactly.
Right.
And real life is messy, right? So how do we bridge that gap? If those crazy, intense feelings are going to inevitably fade, how do we build a love that lasts?
That's where Gary Chapman and his book, The 5 Love Languages, comes in. He dives into what he calls real love, that love that goes beyond the initial infatuation.
Okay, so it's not that we won't feel those deep, intense emotions anymore. It's more about making a conscious effort to prioritize our partner and their happiness, even when it's not always easy or exciting.
Right. Yes. And I love how Chapman describes it. He says, falling in love is like the introduction to a book. Real love, that's the whole story, all the twists and turns, the challenges, the character development.
I love that analogy. It's about embracing the entire journey, not just getting stuck on the first page.
Yeah.
So how do we actually make love last? It can't just be willpower, can it?
You're right. Willpower alone isn't enough. It really comes down to understanding your partner, and that's where those love languages come into play. But before we jump into that,
Oh, come on, don't leave me hanging.
just one more thought. Chapman has this really powerful quote about understanding your partner's needs. He says, when your spouse's emotional love tank is full, the world looks bright. But when it's empty, the world looks dark. Isn't that something?
Wow. Yeah, that really makes you think about how we impact each other, doesn't it? It's like if we're not actively trying to keep those love tanks full, well, things can get pretty bleak pretty fast.
Right. And that's why I think it's so empowering to know that even when the initial fireworks fade, it doesn't mean the love is gone. It just means you're moving into a different stage, a deeper phase where you can build something really meaningful.
This is so fascinating. So we've talked about how love is more than just a feeling. It's a choice we make, a conscious decision to show up for someone else, even when it's hard. And it sounds like these love languages are tools that can help us actually do that.
Exactly. And the best part is that these tools are accessible to everyone. It's not about grand gestures or buying expensive gifts. It's about figuring out how to speak your partner's language in a way that really resonates with them.
Okay, now I'm really hooked. Tell me more. How do we figure out our own love language? And more importantly, how do we use that knowledge to build stronger, more fulfilling relationships?
Well, to do that, we need to dive into those 5 love languages.
All right, looks like we've got another deep dive ahead of us. I'm ready. Okay, I am so ready to unpack these love languages. But before we do, can we just acknowledge how empowering this whole conversation has been? I mean, learning that we don't have to freak out when that initial spark starts to fade. It's kind of freeing, actually.
Absolutely. It takes the pressure off, Like we don't
Right.
have to chase those initial highs forever.
Exactly. It's like, okay, we've had the incredible appetizer, the amazing first act, but now it's time to really savor the main course, the whole story, not just the beginning.
I love that because it's in those later chapters, those later stages, that we really start to see what we're made of, both individually and as a couple.
And that's where we can make a conscious choice to build something real, something that lasts.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling disappointed when those butterflies fade a bit, we can get curious. Like, okay, how do we want to love each other now? What does that look like?
I love that question.
Yeah.
Because it shifts our perspective, right? It's not about trying to recapture something that's gone. It's about creating something new and even more meaningful. And that's where, like we were saying, those love languages can be absolute game changers.
Okay, so spill it. Give us a sneak peek at these love languages. How do we even begin to figure out what they are?
Well, let's imagine for a second that your partner's love language is acts of service. Little things, right? Doing the dishes, taking out the trash, maybe surprising them by getting their car washed. To you, those things might seem kind of insignificant.
Yeah, just everyday stuff.
Exactly. But to someone whose love language is acts of service, those small gestures speak volumes. It's like you're saying, hey, I see you. I care about you enough to make your life a little easier.
It's not about the act itself, it's about the message behind it.
Exactly. Or let's say their love language is words of affirmation. For those people hearing, I love you, or getting genuine compliments, words of encouragement, that's huge. It's like you're speaking directly to their heart.
So powerful, right? Because it makes you feel seen and appreciated for who you are.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that when you start to understand your own love language and that of your partner, it transforms how you communicate. It's like you're finally speaking the same language, and that can make all the difference.
This has been incredible. We've covered so much ground today, from those intoxicating early days of limerence all the way to making that conscious choice to cultivate a love that lasts.
And we've just scratched the surface.
We have. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that we get to choose how we love, and we get to learn how to be loved in a way that truly fulfills us. It's all about communication, understanding, and making that conscious effort to really see and appreciate our partners for who they are. Well, folks, we've taken a deep dive into the science of love, busted some myths, and hopefully sparked some new insights into your own relationships. And who knows, maybe even inspired some interesting conversations along the way.